Most people see the Kennedy mansions as sunlit symbols of American promise, clapboard estates at Hyannis Port, and oceanfront palaces in Palm Beach, built for safety, privacy, and celebration. But behind those walls are police reports, boarded windows, and rooms left untouched after sudden deaths, from 1944 plane wreckage off the English coast to a locked bedroom in 1999. This film follows the houses themselves to ask how so much money built refuge everywhere and still could not keep disaster from coming home. The houses came before the dynasty. Joseph Kennedy Sr. understood this before he understood politics. Money meant nothing if you could not anchor it to the ground. In 1928, he purchased the sprawling white clapboard compound at Hyannis Port for $25,000. The price was modest. The intention was not. He wanted roots for a family that had climbed from Irish immigrant poverty to American wealth in a single generation. The compound sat on 6 acres overlooking Nantucket Sound, close enough to Boston for business, but distant enough to escape its judgment. The house demanded everything a mansion demands: staff to maintain it, grounds to manicure, rooms to fill with children. Joseph Sr. purchased the estate when his oldest son was 13 and his youngest had not yet been born. 9 children would summer there. The house absorbed them all. It expanded with their needs. A tennis court appeared. A private dock extended into the water. Bedrooms multiplied as the family grew. But Hyannis Port was never just a house. It became the physical manifestation of Joseph Sr.'s central obsession: control. He controlled his fortune through strategic film studio investments and stock market plays that bordered on manipulation. He controlled his family through iron discipline and relentless ambition. The compound gave him a kingdom where those rules applied without question. Every summer, the children sailed on strict schedules. They competed in races he designed. They ate meals at times he dictated. The house was both sanctuary and training ground. Then came Palm Beach. In 1933, Joseph Sr. purchased a Mediterranean revival mansion on North Ocean Boulevard for $120,000. The estate sprawled across oceanfront property in Florida's most exclusive enclave. The architecture spoke a different language than Hyannis Port. Where the Cape Cod compound projected New England restraint, the Palm Beach mansion announced arrival. Coral stone walls, barrel tile roof, lush tropical landscaping that required year-round management. This house was not about privacy. It was about being seen by the people who mattered. The mansion functioned as Joseph Sr.'s winter headquarters during the season when American wealth migrated south. He entertained studio executives there. He hosted political allies. The house validated him in ways Hyannis Port never could. Palm Beach society had rejected Irish Catholics for decades. Owning property there forced acceptance. The house was leverage. Each Kennedy estate served a distinct purpose in the family architecture. When Robert Kennedy married Ethel Skakel in 1950, they eventually settled at Hickory Hill in McLean, Virginia. The Georgian brick mansion sat on 6 acres and had belonged to John Kennedy before Robert took it over. The house projected intellectual seriousness. Robert filled it with books, political advisors, and eventually 11 children. The estate became a salon where senators debated policy around the swimming pool, and attorneys general strategized in the library. Hickory Hill was the thinking Kennedy house. John Kennedy himself preferred proximity to power over domestic grandeur. After marrying Jacqueline Bouvier in 1953, they purchased a modest estate in Virginia called Wexford, then later leased a weekend home in Middleburg. These houses were functional, elegant, restrained. They served the image of a young senator ascending to the presidency. But even John Kennedy understood that the true Kennedy home was Hyannis Port. The compound was where the mythology hardened into ritual. Summer weekends became political strategy sessions, disguised as family gatherings. John Kennedy announced his presidential candidacy from Hyannis Port. Television cameras captured touch football games on the lawn. Photographers shot carefully arranged images of the family sailing together. The house became a stage set for American aspiration. Behind those images was calculation. Every photograph reinforced the narrative Joseph Sr. had constructed, a dynasty built on vigor, unity, and the promise that wealth could purchase safety. By 1960, when John Kennedy entered the White House, the estate stood as monuments to that promise. Hyannis Port had expanded to over 10,000 square feet of main house, plus multiple guest cottages. The compound employed a permanent staff of groundskeepers, housekeepers, security personnel, and boat maintenance crews. Palm Beach operated on a similar scale. The houses projected permanence. They were built to outlast the people who slept in them. The Kennedy children grew up believing in that permanence. They were raised inside walls that seemed capable of holding back the world. The estates gave them private beaches when public ones were too dangerous. They gave them controlled environments when outside forces felt threatening. The houses were fortresses disguised as summer homes. And fortresses, by definition, exist to keep disaster outside. This was the foundational myth. The buildings themselves collaborated in the illusion. Hyannis Port's white clapboard exterior gleamed in photographs. The main house sat elevated above the lawn, commanding views of the water. The structure communicated stability. Inside, rooms were decorated with nautical paintings and family photographs that stretched back generations. The house archived Kennedy history in physical form. It told its occupants they were part of something that would endure. Palm Beach performed the same function with different aesthetics. The coral stone walls were thick enough to withstand hurricanes. The estate's position on the ocean reinforced the family's connection to maritime tradition. The grounds were maintained to magazine perfection, every hedge trimmed, every palm tree healthy. The house presented invulnerability, but houses are not invulnerable. They are structures that require constant feeding, money, labor, vigilance. The Kennedys poured all three into their estates, convinced that enough resources could build something untouchable. Joseph Sr. spent decades acquiring properties and expanding compounds. He hired staff to maintain them. He paid for security to guard them. He believed the houses could protect what he had built. By the time John Kennedy reached the presidency, the family controlled a real estate empire that stretched from Massachusetts to Florida to Virginia. Each house reinforced the others. The compound at Hyannis Port was the emotional center. Palm Beach was the social triumph. The Virginia estates were the intellectual and political command posts. Together, they formed an architecture of power. The dream was complete. The houses stood ready to absorb generations of Kennedy children. They represented arrival, permanence, and the belief that wealth could construct immunity from the forces that destroyed ordinary families. They were symbols before they were homes, and symbols, unlike people, are not supposed to break. But every fortress has a flaw built into its foundation. The houses devoured money like living organisms. Hyannis Port alone required a full-time staff of 12 during peak season. Groundskeepers maintained 6 acres of lawn, gardens, and waterfront. Housekeepers cleaned over 10,000 square feet of interior space. Boat crews, managed the family's sailboats and motorboats. The tennis court needed resurfacing. The dock required annual inspection and repair. The main house itself demanded constant attention. Salt air corroded fixtures. Wind damaged shingles. Water intrusion threatened foundations. The annual cost to operate Hyannis Port exceeded what most American families earned in a decade. Palm Beach consumed even more. The estate required year-round maintenance, despite the family only occupying it for winter months. The tropical climate accelerated decay. Humidity damaged interiors. Storms battered the oceanfront structure. The landscaping alone cost tens of thousands annually. Irrigation systems, pest control, tree pruning. The house needed what all Florida estates need: perpetual intervention against nature's effort to reclaim the land. Then came security. After John Kennedy entered politics, the compounds transformed from private residences into quasi-public spaces. Secret Service details arrived. Checkpoints appeared at property entrances. Communication equipment was installed. The houses sprouted infrastructure that had nothing to do with family life. Hyannis Port added a helipad. Telephone lines multiplied. Guard stations occupied corners of the property that had been designed for leisure. The cost was not merely financial. Privacy collapsed under the weight of protection. Staff who had worked for the family for years now shared space with federal agents. Rooms that had been bedrooms became command centers. The houses lost intimacy even as they gained guards. Security protocols replaced family rituals. Children who had run freely across the lawn now moved through controlled zones. The estates also carried invisible operational burdens that no photograph captured. After Joseph Jr. died in 1944, his bedroom at Hyannis Port remained largely untouched. The family did not formally seal it, but everyone understood the room differently. It became a museum within a living house. Maintenance staff cleaned it. They changed linens. But the space was frozen. It no longer functioned as a bedroom. It functioned as evidence that the house remembered what the family could not speak about. This pattern repeated. When John Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, Hyannis Port absorbed the grief. The main house became the site where family gathered to mourn privately. Certain rooms became associated with that mourning. The den where Rose Kennedy received the news. The porch where family members sat in silence. These spaces retained emotional weight. They could not simply revert to their original purposes. The house carried memory in its walls. Palm Beach underwent similar transformation. What had been a symbol of social triumph became a target for public scrutiny. Journalists camped outside the gates. Photographers used telephoto lenses to capture images from the beach. The estate that had been built for display now required walls to block visibility. Security fencing went up. Hedges grew taller. The house turned inward, trading its original purpose for defensive posture. The staff knew things the public never learned. They saw which rooms were used and which were avoided. They understood that certain corridors in Hyannis Port went weeks without foot traffic, despite the house being occupied. They noticed that entire wings sat empty while family members crowded into smaller spaces. The houses were far too large for the emotional intimacy they were supposed to contain. Hickory Hill revealed a different tension. Robert and Ethel Kennedy filled the estate with 11 children and constant activity. The house overflowed with life. But that overflow came at operational cost. The grounds required full-time management. The swimming pool became a site of both recreation and danger, demanding lifeguards during parties and constant maintenance year-round. The house absorbed chaos, but chaos extracts payment. Furniture broke. Walls needed repainting. The estate aged faster than structures occupied by smaller, calmer families. The houses also demanded silence from the people who maintained them. Staff members signed informal agreements not to discuss what they witnessed. The families needed discretion. They paid for it through salaries and loyalty. But that discretion created information asymmetry. The public saw photographs of smiling families on pristine lawns. They did not see the arguments, the tensions, the moments when the estates felt more like prisons than sanctuaries. Maintenance logs tell a story that guest books conceal. Hyannis Port's records show constant repairs to the same systems. The heating system failed repeatedly. The foundation developed cracks that required ongoing monitoring. The roof needed replacement every 15 years. These were not signs of neglect. They were evidence that even well-funded houses fight losing battles against time and elements. The compound could be maintained, but never perfected. The financial architecture supporting the estates grew increasingly complex. Trusts were established to manage property taxes and operational costs. The estates were sometimes held in corporate structures to protect family wealth. Accountants managed budgets that most Americans could not comprehend. The houses were not simply homes. They were assets that required professional management, and yet, for all that management, the houses could not protect their occupants. Security personnel patrolled the grounds at Hyannis Port on the day in 1999 when John Kennedy Jr. prepared for his final flight. The house was fully staffed. Every system functioned. Guards were positioned at entry points. The compound operated exactly as designed. And still, disaster found its way inside through a telephone call announcing a plane had disappeared off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. The house could do nothing but absorb the news. Palm Beach experienced its own failures of protection. In 1991, William Kennedy Smith was accused of rape at the estate. The mansion that had been built to project respectability became the setting for scandal. Police investigated rooms that had been designed for privacy. Media descended on property that had been purchased for exclusivity. The house could not prevent what happened inside its walls, and it could not prevent the world from learning about it. The estates revealed their fundamental limitation. They could house people. They could provide comfort and display wealth. They could be maintained and guarded and managed, but they could not alter fate. They were structures, and structures have no power beyond the physical. They do not think. They do not intervene. They can only witness. This is what the hidden reality exposes. Behind the photographs of family gatherings and political strategy sessions was an entire ecosystem of labor and money working to maintain an illusion. The houses required constant feeding. They demanded sacrifice from the people who cleaned them, guarded them, and lived inside them. The estates isolated their occupants, even as they promised community. They consumed resources while delivering diminishing returns on safety. The Kennedy children grew up inside this contradiction. They saw the public rooms designed for photographs and the private rooms that accumulated grief. They understood that certain doors stayed closed and certain topics remained unspoken. They learned that the houses were both homes and stages, sanctuaries and museums. They came to realize, slowly and painfully, that the structures their grandfather had built to protect them were powerless against the forces that mattered most. The houses stood, but standing is not the same as protecting. The telephone rang in Hyannis Port on August 12, 1944. The main house had survived hurricanes, nor'easters, and years of salt air corrosion, It had weathered the normal crises that houses endure, but it was not built to contain the words coming through the line from military officials in England. Joseph Kennedy Jr.'s bomber had exploded during a volunteer mission over the English Channel. There would be no body. There would be no funeral with a casket. The house absorbed the impact. Rose Kennedy took the call in the den. The room had been designed for casual family conversations, decorated with comfortable furniture and windows overlooking the lawn. After that call, the room functioned differently. It became the place where the Kennedy family's foundational myth first cracked. Joseph Sr. had built the compound as a fortress for his dynasty. He had believed that enough money, enough property, enough control could protect what mattered. The house could not argue back. It could only stand there while that belief shattered. The family did what families do inside houses after trauma. They closed doors. They lowered voices. They moved through rooms they had always moved through, but the rooms meant something else now. Joseph Jr.'s bedroom on the second floor remained largely as he had left it. Staff continued cleaning it, but no one slept there. The space became a void that the house had to carry. Every structure has load-bearing walls. This was a load-bearing absence. Hyannis Port would carry many more. When John Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas on November 22, 1963, the compound transformed into the family's grieving center. Relatives arrived. Secret Service details expanded. The main house filled with people, yet it felt empty. The porch where John had read newspapers during summer weekends now held only echoes. The dock where he had boarded boats for afternoon sails became a place to avoid. The house knew what it was now, not a sanctuary, a repository. It held the physical evidence of a family that wealth could not save. Photographs on walls showed people who were dead. Bedrooms contained belongings that would never be claimed. The structure remained intact, while the lives it was meant to protect disintegrated. Palm Beach faced its own rupture. The estate had been purchased as proof of arrival, a declaration that the Kennedys belonged among America's elite. But belonging offers no immunity. On Good Friday in 1991, William Kennedy Smith brought a woman back to the mansion after a night at a local bar. What happened next became the subject of a rape accusation, a trial, and international media attention. The house could not prevent it. Security had been present. The estate was fully staffed. Every lock worked. Every alarm functioned. And still, the mansion became a crime scene. Police investigators walked through rooms that had been designed for senators and film stars. They photographed hallways. They questioned staff. The house that had projected invulnerability was revealed as porous, vulnerable, ordinary. The trial exposed every room to public scrutiny. Aerial photographs appeared in newspapers. Floor plans were analyzed on television. The estate's layout, its security protocols, its blind spots, all became evidence. The mansion that Joseph Sr. had purchased to escape judgment now endured judgment from millions of strangers. The house could only submit. Then came the final, definitive failure. On July 16, 1999, John Kennedy Jr. departed from New Jersey in a small plane with his wife Carolyn and her sister Lauren. They were headed to Martha's Vineyard, then to Hyannis Port for a family wedding. The compound was ready. Staff had prepared guest rooms. Food had been ordered. The house waited. The call came instead. The plane had disappeared from radar off the coast. Search and rescue operations had begun. The house absorbed relatives arriving with the same expression it had absorbed them in 1944 and 1963. History repeated inside the same walls. The main living room filled with family members waiting for news. The porch held people staring at water that had always seemed peaceful and now felt threatening. The bodies were recovered 5 days later. Hyannis Port had been built as a place where Kennedy children learned to sail. Now it was the place where the last Kennedy son of that generation came home dead from the sky. The compound could not refuse this burden. Houses do not get to choose what they witness. They stand. They endure. They record. After John Jr.'s death, certain spaces at Hyannis Port were quietly avoided. The room where he had stayed during his final visit, the lawn where he had played as a child, the dock where he had learned to tie knots. These locations carried weight the family could not articulate, but everyone felt. The house accumulated these zones of silence. They were not marked with plaques or roped off with barriers. They simply existed as places where memory pressed too hard against the present. The crisis was not a single event. It was a cascade spanning 55 years. Each tragedy added pressure to the structure, not physical pressure. The walls did not crack. The foundation did not shift. The houses endured materially. But emotionally, architecturally, symbolically, the estates could not bear what they contained. They had been built as symbols of permanence, monuments to a family that would outlast its competitors. Instead, they became museums of loss. Media intrusion accelerated the transformation. After each death, journalists surrounded the compounds. Helicopters circled overhead. Telephoto lenses captured images through windows. The estates that had been designed for privacy became the most photographed properties in America. Guards could block physical access, but not cameras. The houses lost their ability to shelter. Legal scrutiny followed. After William Kennedy Smith's trial, every Kennedy estate operated under different assumptions. What happened inside could become public. Privacy was conditional. The houses could no longer function as refuges where family matters stayed contained. They were penetrable, both physically through police warrants and symbolically through media coverage. The compounds also faced internal fracture. As the family grew and diversified, agreements about property use became complicated. Who had right to which house during which season? Who paid for what repairs? Who controlled access? The estates that had been symbols of unity became sites of negotiation. The houses could not resolve these tensions. They could only host them. Hyannis Port began to feel like a burden rather than a blessing. Maintenance costs continued rising. Taxes increased. Insurance premiums climbed after each scandal. The compound required the same level of investment it had always required, but the emotional return had diminished. The house still stood on 6 acres overlooking Nantucket Sound. It still required staff and upkeep and constant attention, but it could no longer deliver what Joseph Sr. had promised: safety. The crisis revealed the central truth. The houses had always been powerless. They were never fortresses. They were stages where tragedy performed in front of an audience that grew larger with each disaster. The estates could display wealth but not prevent loss. They could project permanence but not deliver it. They were buildings, and buildings can only do what buildings do: stand still and witness. What the Kennedy family built with such confidence came apart inside the structures meant to hold it together. The houses outlived the people who believed in them. Hyannis Port still stands on its 6 acres overlooking Nantucket Sound. The white clapboard main house, the guest cottages, the private dock, all remain. The structure has been maintained through the decades exactly as Joseph Sr. intended. Groundskeepers still tend the lawn. Staff still clean the rooms. The compound operates as it always has, except now it operates without illusion. The family never abandoned it. Multiple generations of Kennedys continue using the property during summer months. Children and grandchildren who never met Joseph Sr. still sail from the dock he built. They play on the lawn where their parents played. They sleep in rooms that have absorbed 97 years of family history. The house has not been sold or converted or repurposed. It remains a Kennedy estate, but its meaning has shifted. What was built as a symbol of protection has become a monument to its own failure. The house proves that money can construct permanence of property, but not permanence of people. Walls endure while lives fracture. The compound stands as evidence that the wealthiest family in America could not buy immunity from the forces that destroy everyone. Palm Beach followed a different trajectory. The mansion remained in family hands for decades after Joseph Sr.'s death. It continued serving as a winter retreat, though with diminished glamour. The estate that had projected social triumph in the 1930s felt increasingly like an artifact by the 2000s. The architecture belonged to an era of American wealth that no longer existed. The house was beautiful but anachronistic. In 2021, the Palm Beach estate sold for over $40 million. The sale marked a quiet end to the family's formal connection to the property. The new owners acquired not just a mansion, but a historical landmark. The house where Joseph Sr. entertained studio executives and Rose Kennedy hosted society luncheons now belonged to someone else's story. The structure itself did not care. Houses do not mourn their owners. They simply transfer. Hickory Hill met a similar fate. After Robert Kennedy's assassination in 1968, Ethel Kennedy remained at the estate for decades. The house continued absorbing the chaos of 11 children growing into adults, then having children of their own, but eventually the operational cost exceeded the emotional value. In 2009, Hickory Hill sold for approximately $8.5 million. The Georgian mansion became someone else's problem to maintain. These sales reveal the ultimate limitation of architectural legacy. Houses can be preserved, but they cannot preserve meaning. The estates still exist. They have not decayed or been demolished, but they no longer represent what they once did. Hyannis Port is a Kennedy family property that functions as a reminder of loss. Palm Beach and Hickory Hill have passed into other hands entirely. The buildings survived their original purpose. The preservation paradox haunts every estate. To maintain these houses requires the same resources that built them: enormous ongoing investment. Roofs must be replaced, systems must be upgraded, grounds must be tended. The houses demand feeding whether or not they deliver value beyond shelter. Some Kennedy descendants view the compounds as sacred trust. Others see them as financial drain. The buildings themselves remain neutral. They need what they need. What remains is not triumph, but warning. The Kennedy estates demonstrate that wealth can construct, but not protect. They show that property endures long after the people who build it. They prove that houses witness everything and prevent nothing. These are not lessons the family intended to teach. Joseph Sr. built Hyannis Port to establish a dynasty. He purchased Palm Beach to claim social legitimacy. He funded an empire of estates to provide refuge. Instead, he built monuments to the limits of control. The houses absorbed tragedy because they had no choice. They stood as backdrops while family members died in plane crashes, assassinations, skiing accidents, and drug overdoses. The structures recorded each loss in the same way they recorded each celebration, passively, permanently, without judgment. The walls did not crack when John Kennedy was shot. The foundation did not shift when John Jr.'s plane went down. The houses simply continued standing. This is their legacy. They are beautiful, expensive, historically significant structures that could not save anyone. They represent the best architects and builders could deliver in their respective eras. They showcase what money can purchase in terms of square footage, oceanfront access, and architectural detail. They prove that wealth can acquire property and maintain it across generations. But they also prove what wealth cannot do. It cannot buy safety. It cannot prevent disaster. It cannot protect children from plane crashes or assassins. It cannot keep scandal from finding its way inside. It cannot transform a summer retreat into an actual fortress. Money builds walls, but walls are only walls. The broader lesson extends beyond the Kennedy family. Every dynastic estate tells a version of this story. Vanderbilt mansions, Astor properties, Rockefeller compounds. They all project the same myth, permanence through wealth. And they all reveal the same truth. Buildings outlast the illusions that justified them. The grandest house is still just a structure waiting for the next owner, or the next tragedy, or the next transaction that proves it was never special, only expensive. The Kennedy estates now exist primarily as historical artifacts. They are studied by researchers, photographed by tourists, referenced in documentaries. They serve the same function as any historical site. They remind us of what happened. Hyannis Port reminds us of summer weekends and political strategy sessions and bedrooms left empty after sudden death. Palm Beach reminds us of social aspiration and scandal. Hickory Hill reminds us of intellectual energy and the chaos of large families. What they cannot do is change the past. The houses stand as permanent witnesses to impermanent lives. They are monuments built by people who believed monuments could matter. And perhaps they do matter, just not in the way their builders intended. They matter as evidence. They matter as warning. They matter as proof that human ambition always overestimates its own power. Joseph Kennedy Sr. purchased Hyannis Port in 1928, believing he could create something that would last. He was correct. The house has lasted. It will likely last another century if maintained properly. But what he built was not a fortress. It was a museum waiting to fill with memory. The tragedy is not that the houses failed. The tragedy is that the family believed houses could succeed at something houses were never designed to do. Structures provide shelter. They organize space. They display taste and wealth and architectural fashion. But they do not protect against fate. They are not shields. They are containers. The Kennedy estates contained extraordinary lives and extraordinary losses. They witnessed ambition and achievement and the violent collapse of both. They stood silent while family members grieved in private rooms and performed composure in public ones. They absorbed the weight of expectation that no building should carry. They were asked to be symbols when they were only structures. And now they stand as both, symbols of what wealth can build, structures proving what wealth cannot prevent. They endure as the most permanent things the Kennedy family created, outliving the dynasty they were meant to protect. They are beautiful and expensive and ultimately powerless, which makes them perfect monuments to the family that built them. The houses remain. The people do not. That is the legacy. The story of the Kennedy estates is the story of every grand house ever built with the belief that walls could keep the world outside. If this architectural history resonated with you, There are countless other estates that tell similar stories of ambition, loss, and the limits of wealth. What dynastic property should we examine next? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you found value in this exploration of how buildings witness what they cannot prevent, consider subscribing. There are more houses with stories to tell, and some of those stories are even darker than this one. Thank you for watching.